Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Anderson, and I'm the project director for American Roundtable. Welcome to today's event. Today is the fifth in a series of conversations that complement the 9 reports commissioned by the Architectural League's American Roundtable. For those of you new to this initiative, a bit of background, and for those stalwarts who have heard this a few times now as we have continued this program series, please bear with me. The American Roundtable project seeks to bring together on-the-ground perspectives on the condition of American small to mid-sized communities and what they need to thrive going forward. The proposition at the heart of this initiative is that too often our understanding of rural areas and small cities is reduced to caricature and oversimplification. So our hope is to highlight, in all their complexity and nuance, communities often overlooked, and to provide platforms for individuals and organizations to share their stories and work, imagining, understanding, and improving their local built environments. The 9 reports of American Roundtable each look at a different community or region in the United States. The first 5 reports on West Virginia, the Lower Rio Grande region of New Mexico, Maine's River Valley, South Beach, Washington, and Along the Lumbee River, North Carolina, have been digitally published, and the others will be published in forthcoming weeks, including one next Tuesday on the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. I don't want to take too much time away from today's presentations and discussion, so I encourage you to visit archleague.org to learn more about the entire initiative and to explore all of the reports. Our conversation today turns to communities along the Lumbee River in North Carolina. The report was conceived by editors Morgan Augillard and Joey Swerdlin, along with Noran Sanford. And today we have the pleasure of hearing from them, along with a number of their report's contributors, Tanner Capps, Deb Gunsallus, Ed Hunt, Christie Poteet, and Andie Rea. Morgan, Joey, and Noran will briefly introduce the report, and then I'll be joined by the League's Executive Director, Rosalie Genevro. We, along with the report's contributors, will then discuss the report in more detail. We do hope to take some questions from the audience at that time, so please add any questions to the Zoom Q&A feature. And any questions we aren't able to get to, we will be sure to share with the presenters for follow-up after the event. Since we have a large group sharing their thoughts today, I will keep introductions very short. Morgan Augillard is a designer and urban planner working in educational real estate development. Joey Swerdlin is an architectural designer who currently works for Morfolio as its community director. Augillard and Swerdlin are both members of Group Project, a collective of former and current MIT students who have worked with the nonprofit North Carolina-based youth organization Growing Change for 4 years. Noran Sanford is the founder of Growing Change and a native of Scotland County, North Carolina. Sanford is trained as a clinical social worker. He will also be joined today by 2 of Growing Change's youth leaders, Ravin Patel and Ryan Morin. Tanner Capps serves as assistant professor of philosophy and religious studies at St. Andrews University, Laurinburg, North Carolina. Deb Gunsallus is an AmeriCorps Vista for Hunger with the Office for Community and Civic Engagement at UNC Pembroke. Ed Hunt is the Director of Sustainability at the Thomas Entrepreneurship Hub, also at UNC Pembroke. Christie Poteet is the Director of the Office for Community and Civic Engagement, also at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. And Andie Rea is a North Carolina-based digital media creator. And with that, I will turn things over to Morgan, Joey, and Noran.
Thanks so much for having us. I think, Nick, you actually captured a lot of my introduction. So I don't know, Joey, if you want to just jump in, we can get started.
Sure, that sounds good. So thank you especially to the ARC League and to Nick and everyone behind the scenes who's been working to make these reports what they are. After looking at them in Google Docs for the past year now, it's really nice to see them all crisp and freshened up on the website. And so thank you so much for all of your editing time and time in developing that and making that happen. And also thank you to our editor team as well within Group Project. Want to especially thank Kylan and Isadora for their contributing editing reports. And then also on our research team, Jonathan Burley, Jola Idau, and Emily Wissaman. Thank you all for your help and support throughout the process. So I am going to just jump in here, get where I'm supposed to start speaking from. All right, so along the Lumbee River, which is the reclaimed name of the Lumber River by the Lumbee tribe, both lifts up the work happening in this region and also seeks to underscore the power and importance of building intimate community networks across small southern towns. What is most compelling about these contributors is their breadth of community-activated work and the multitude of people knowingly and unknowingly enacting similar theories of change. As we get into things, what I'd like to do first is to share my screen and get the program started here. And then Morgan, do you want to jump back? I know I jumped ahead a little bit. If you want to do the little group project part, or we can just jump into Noran speaking.
I think let's just go ahead and jump into Noran speaking. I mean, I can just reiterate quickly that
yeah.
I'll reiterate a little bit of group project. So thanks again. So Joey and I, as Nick mentioned a little bit, Joey and I met during graduate school and since then have collaborated together on several projects with a bunch of other folks, some of the ones that Joey mentioned earlier that helped with this project. We've collaborated with them on different architectural and design projects under the name Group Project. But for the last 4 years, Group Project's primary collaboration has been with Growing Change, Noran's nonprofit that's operated in Wagram, North Carolina, which is located in the southernmost part of North Carolina in Scotland County. And it's about 3 hours away from Charlotte and Wilmington and near the South Carolina border. And Growing Change is a youth-led initiative that has been working to flip a decommissioned prison site into an agricultural community center. And so we've been working with them to develop design projects to kind of show the possibilities that could happen on the site that Growing Change is currently occupying. We met Noran in 2017 when he and several of the Growing Change youth leaders gave a presentation at MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning. And then their research actually became, or their work actually became part of a research project for one of the students there at the time. Since then, we've worked with Growing Change to develop several site projects, building redevelopment proposals. We've designed porch swings and building signage and other small site interventions. But most recently, we've worked with Noran and a bunch of the other incredible people that Noran connected us with on this report. And so we're excited to give a little preview of what's in the report.
Yeah. So at this time, we'd just like to hand it over to Noran, who, if you could briefly chat about Growing Change's connection to all of these contributors and why some of these folks ended up becoming a part of the report and how you're kind of connected with them.
Absolutely. And first, we wanted to also say thank you to Nick Architectural League, of course, our partners at Group Project, especially the work that Joey and Morgan, Kylan and Isadora put in on this report with the support of the other Group Project team members. And really want to say thanks to our neighbors up and down Highway 74. So if you look at this map, you'll see from the top community of Ellerby, and you'll see the breakout line of Devon Goodwin. So that's a food aggregation hub. And this fancy words to mean that local produce is bought, aggregated, brought together there, and then redistributed so that small to medium growers have better access to the market. As you go down Highway 74, you end up in the Scotland County area, and that's where it brings in our work at Growing Change. So very specifically, our ambition, our vision is to lift up a replicable model that will be open sourced and given away to the 300 communities in the US trying to figure out what to do with decommissioned prisons. So answering the new question of what to do with old prisons. This is a powerful question to pause on, especially in the days that we live in now, as these sites in North Carolina was the way that North Carolina built its road systems, using more forced prison labor than any other state in the nation. So that by 1979, we had more prisons than any other state and locked up the greatest ratio of our population at height of the prison building project. That's been reformed, and so many of these field camp prisons have been closing. If you put a point in Wagram, North Carolina, and you draw a 50-mile radius around it, there are 6 decommissioned units just in this area of southeastern North Carolina on the North and South Carolina border. Then as you go further south, you get to our neighbors in Pembroke and the good work. And also in Scotland County, Dr. Tanner Capps and the work in a local university, a liberal arts university that's revisioning itself in these challenging days for small liberal arts private institutions, and really serving a lot of the first generation students now. And then as you drift down toward Pembroke and Robeson County, you get to the heart of the Lumbee Nation, Native American nation, and our neighbors there who are participating in radical reclamations of UNCP with the good work of Christie and Deb. Have reclaimed an old dormitory as well as a food pantry doing nationally innovative work on the campus. And Ed Hunt will talk a little bit about his innovative work to bring agriculture and agricultural focus from the state back into this region, a powerhouse region of agriculture, and specifically giving access to our regional small and medium-sized growers. I guess a theme for us then that connects all of us is radical reclamation. And Dr. Capps, a PhD in philosophy and theology, will be able to speak to that some in the report as well. But this radical reclamation kind of boils down to this. We live in one of the most challenged regions in North Carolina, however you measure it, whether it's crime rates, food insecurity, health outcomes, overall poverty. We are in one of the most challenged regions. And so for a long time, we've been making something out of nothing. And so now as we reach and reclaim these spaces, whether it's an old agricultural warehouse in Devon's case, a struggling liberal arts university in Dr. Capps' case, closed prison in our case, land and a focus in agriculture in Ed's case, or the dormitory food pantry space in Deb and Christie's space. You see this radical reclamation. And I believe this is a template not just to how to reuse closed prisons in America. It's when there's a synergy that rises and there's innovation that's occurring independently, there is, well, things rise and converge. And I can't emphasize this more. The work of group projects and the work of the designers, architects, planners who have helped us revision. This revisioning are tools that we use to spur the work further. It's a way for us to clarify our own mission and vision. And it's a way to leverage the gatekeepers that are taking a step out on a limb to figure out these public-private partnerships for how to reuse the closed prisons. It's without those lever bars, I don't think you'd see the progress that we see now. So specifically for Grow and Change, we are lifting up a national model, a public policy practice tool, really, as to how these prisons can be reused, and we're giving it away through the extension system for the other communities. Our youth leaders will also be able to speak to how we answer to a board of youth, all youth who have known struggle, and now are leaders in helping us figure out how to move this forward. So I'll turn it back over to Joey and Morgan.
Yeah, thanks for
Excellent.
the introduction, Noran. That was actually like a great overview. I think we
Yeah,
had
with
some additional things, but I think that overview was like perfectly stated to hit a lot of the parts of the report without like giving all the detail away. So allowing people to still be able to speak to, or still be able to read it and see what's else is being offered in the report. So thanks for that.
Great. So I think with that, we'll give it back over to you, Nick, and you can begin the discussion from here.
Sure. Thank you, all three of you, for sort of introducing that. And Noran, the idea of radical reclamation, I really love as the sort of theme that pulses throughout this report. So the plan is we're hoping to just sort of engage all of you who contributed to the report to give an opportunity to discuss a little bit more about your sort of work of radical reclamation. And then afterwards, we can kind of open it up to some larger questions for the kind of region as a whole and any Q&A from the audience. And just to remind folks again, please add that and any questions to the Q&A feature in Zoom. So to start, I'm wondering if I can turn to Ed Hunt from the Thomas Entrepreneurship Hub to talk a little bit about your idea of how farming can be a sort of viable economic future for this region that has historically been an agricultural region, but your ideas of how to allow smaller entrepreneurial farmers to kind of gain a foothold into sort of larger industrial agricultural systems. And specifically, what do these types of farmers or potential farmers need most to succeed?
Okay. All right, Nick, I can address that for you. Again, my name is Ed Hunt. I grew up in the region. I currently operate about a 100-acre row crop farm today. It's under leased operations. So I have a big interest in what it looks like to get our region back to work, back working and creating jobs and opportunity, entrepreneurship plans for the next generation. So we live today in an area where the farming aspect is about a generation behind of what it used to be. Our region is of tobacco dependent, so it was in the early 80s. We lost a lot of tobacco during the buyout, but more importantly, our region has also seen a huge food facility move to the region. Campbell Soup is in our county, right on the Scotland County, Robinson County line, and we're not a part of growing out in that aspect. A lot of the foods are coming from, big farmers out west. Truckers are bringing it in, they're processing, truckers are going out. So there's a logistical opportunity there for not just Robinson County, but Hope County and all the other surrounding counties that's in the region. My big interest is to connect the dots to the small farmers that's growing produce or livestock that is organically grown, pasture raised in a way where there's healthier food for us. But more importantly, what does accessibility look like for us? We are in a food desert, if you could think about it that way. We are. How do we make available foods to people who need those foods? So our food is directly related to our health. And as we look forward to what health looks like and, some of the issues that we're dealing with on a health standpoint, where are these cancers coming from? Where are these ailments coming from? Well, if you look on the commodity side, we're glyphosating everything. So we're a Roundup nation, Roundup ready corn, Roundup ready soybeans, just everything's Roundup. And so as we look toward opportunities as organic, what does hemp look like for us in CBD? There's also some opportunities there, even though the market's fluctuated or flooded with new, CBD growers, there's an opportunity there with some organic opportunities for us to help improve our health system. So the focus that we're looking at here at UNC Pembroke is to, connect those opportunities to entrepreneurship, getting farmers back to the table growing. So most of the stuff that we have, the farm that we're looking at now is, of course, a traditional row crop farm that has had tobacco in the past. We're working right now to get rid of some of the glyphosates that's there. The state of North Carolina recommends that we hold back about 5 years before applying for an organic certification. So today that property's got a cover crop on it, and that cover crop is helping reduce some of the carbon cycle that's out there, putting organic matter back in the soil. A lot of our soils give themselves away by, turning from a dark color to a light color on the top. And so we're doing organic matter as much as possible to keep that function up. Down the road, our focus to connect the university to the community and vice versa is to create a shared use facility where there's shared use facilities used by not only our extension office, but our community, our universities, our land grants such as A&T and NC State, but also FSU. FSU has a big interest in what we're doing. So they want to be a part of a soybean project, a hemp project, and also what does edamame look like for a region? So they want to be a part of all this. We have seen a large fluctuation as well of chicken houses in the region. So Robinson County is home to Mount Air Farms, Sanderson Farms, and Purdue Farms. So we're seeing a big influx of more and more chicken houses coming to the region. And we also have, issues with air quality, poultry litter. There's a lot of questions behind this stuff. Is it good for the soil? Is it good for the atmosphere? What can we do to grow in a standpoint where we're, giving livestock opportunity to be in the sun, to be grass fed? So I meet with these guys quite regular to help them understand what the general public's looking at. So from a husbandry standpoint, how do we, continue to grow products that's healthier for us? So on the commodity side, we're connecting, we got a lot of training to do. We got a lot of educating to do. A commodity farmer is not going to accept some of the things that we're doing as far as sustainable ag goes. The only way I know how to do it is to create a demonstration area, show them what per foot looks like instead of per acre. And as they start to see these numbers, they start to adopt these SOPs that they can adopt it on their farm. Most of the guys that I know that are commodity, they're 4th generation, 5th generation, 6th generation growers. And so what their great grandfather done is what they're going to do, because they know where the markets are. They know how much money they're going to make per bushel, per acre, per year, and it doesn't change. So today we know a lot about, we know that we have food insecurities now because of 2020. We also know that there's a bunch of wholesale buyers that's in the region that want to buy from us. They want to buy because, hey, you guys have the natural resources in place and you have, the potential to grow and grow big. The things that we search for right now on grants is we search for those grants that have educational opportunities as well as equipment. Some of our farmers don't have the education because things have been separated for many years through a lot of different programs. We don't have the equipment. And so in this equipment side, we got to figure out how to demonstrate, train, certify, and research in our region to connect the dots.
Thank you. That's a really fantastic kind of overview of both kind of where agriculture has been in the region and then some of the really fantastic opportunities looking ahead. I guess one quick follow-up, you had mentioned, the idea of, many generation farmers. Overall, do you see people being open to these ideas when they see your sort of demonstration, farms or programs? I'm just curious how the kind of community response is.
Well, right now with where we're locating at, we're getting tons of questions being asked about the location. What are you planning on doing? How do you plan on inserting things that are less impactful to the soil? Right now, all we have is an area with cover crop with a sign on it, but we got more and more people coming to the table asking about GAP training, asking about organic certification. And, GAP is many layers and it's also expensive. There's a lot of paperwork associated with it, but there's a couple layers when you come to look at GAP. There's regular GAP, Harmony Plus, and Global. So one of the things that we do is we help these guys. We help them with their insurance. We help them with this GAP certification. We know that next year, the beginning of next year, that a lot of our farmers won't be able to sell not unless there's a GAP certification somewhere because of risk of diseases. We heard about GAP in the early 80s from the farms out in California, and everyone needs to take into consideration, what does GAP certification look like on your food products that you're bringing in? So we can transmit diseases really easy by touching food and moving food and not keeping it cool. We have some issues right now with coolers. We did put one off campus here at UNC Pembroke. We call it Pembroke Point. We connected the dots with Sodexo and our local growers. So Sodexo comes to the university, they feed 3 times a week. They got a truck that heads back to Raleigh. So our GAP farmers are able to go over and use this cooler at no cost right now to them to sell their products. And this product goes right back to Sodexo in Raleigh or Fresh Point. They scrub it, they send it back out. And these guys are, like I said, GAP certified, and I have to stay on top of them with the certification. But we gotta connect the dots by demonstrating. We got to get them out on the field and do workshops and help them with QuickBooks and what gap training forums looks like. But we got to continue what education is. So for us, most of us understand PDHs or CEs, those sort of things. These new farmers that's coming along, they got to have PDHs as well, because this stuff changes so rapidly that it's hard for one person to keep up with it. So we have issues in irrigation and humidities, and right now we got a whole bunch of issues with climate change that we've never seen before. One day it's wet, next day it's dry. We're getting all kind of different fluctuations of the weather. So we're talking to these guys about growing indoors more so than anything. We got controls of outdoor climate issues that can help them succeed. But we also live in a region where having the right tools can help us generate not just one crop, but multiple crops through the year if we're inside. And we're teaching inside operations more so than anything. You got to go inside. You got controls. We want to grow food every day. We don't want to be one and done as a commodity guy. We want to have product coming out of the tunnel as much as possible. And so we're teaching organic, certification. We're teaching irrigation, whether it's from overhead or drip or mist. We're teaching how these things affect how a plant is grown, and connecting the dots too with restaurateurs, managers, food producers. All these, we're connecting these dots as we move along.
Thank you. That's really great that people seem to be sort of open to some of these new systems and thinking creatively about how the sort of whole agricultural sector can be sort of expanded and interconnected in new ways. So now I'd like to turn to Christie and Deb just to hear a little bit more about your work. For those of you who have yet to read the report, Christie and Deb lead up the sort of care center at UNC Pembroke, which is a really amazing initiative to provide nutrition as well as housing and clothing support actually for students in need. So my question is sort of based on a reflection that I've seen sort of throughout this report that really relies on the sort of beauty and importance of whether you want to call it small C citizenship or care for neighbors, networks of support in rural communities. And in your sort of interview that's included in the report, Christie, you talk about your educational experience at Berea College in Kentucky, and Deb as a sort of VISTA participant. I'm wondering if you could start just by sharing the sort of ethos of support and care that influences and sustains your work.
Sure. So I was a first generation college student. I grew up in rural Appalachia. So Berea College, if you're not familiar with the mission, was designed for students like me to make sure that I had access to education where maybe I wouldn't otherwise. So service, giving back, making that a part of who you are is a part of the Berea mission. And I think, as I mentioned in the report, that my job is to then take the Berea mission into other places. And there's no better place than a place like UNC Pembroke, where so many students are first gen, low income, and need an opportunity to have access to education so that they can move the needle in their own lives. So the Care Resource Center supports students in ways that maybe we often forget that students might need to be supported. So we did a survey on our campus and found that 80% of the students were food insecure. That was not surprising though, because so many of our students are Pell eligible, first gen, low income. So the Care Resource Center makes sure that students don't have to choose between books and food, or between paying for their education and food. And as a student, Berea took care of me, but if it wasn't for Berea, I know that I would have been in that situation. So you think about as a student, what that would have been like. We kind of think of maybe being hungry as a rite of passage for college students. We make fun of the fact that maybe we eat ramen noodles all the time. But really, if you think about it, how can you pass organic chemistry if all you've eaten is ramen noodles and Mountain Dew? Like, how are you successful in college if you're not, you don't have access to nutrition? So through Deb, we built a network where we are connected to places like Walmart and Pembroke, through Second Harvest Food Bank, to Sodexo, where we're recovering food, making sure that it's getting to the places where it needs to get to, which is the mouths of students in our community. And then food that's not eaten, we're completing that food cycle, donating back to local farmers. And then those farmers in some way are connected back to Sodexo, and our students are learning through service learning projects. And Deb can talk about a new project we've started with our biology department, where we're trying to support our own campus garden and thinking about how we get students involved in sustainable food development there. So it's a full circle. Like, we're continuously thinking about how we're supporting students, how we're getting them involved in the process of supporting the community. And that's our mission of our office, is to provide opportunities for students to engage in the local community to make a difference. But we can't ask them to do that if they're hungry. So we need to meet their needs while they're also meeting the needs of others. So Deb, if you want to add anything.
Like Christie said, on America Vista, I created this food system. The food, we call it the food cycle, and it helps distribute food that's been purchased or food that's donated, and then we put it into our pantry, and then we recycle it through giving it to farmers, and the farmers help us give back to our food, which means that food is grown. We're also doing a new project with our biology department and our agriculture club, where we help them with volunteers and we help them grow the food, and then we get a portion of it back. And we learn so that we can start our own garden one day.
I'm curious to both of you, kind of thinking a bit about how Noran was speaking about his work in terms of flipping the prison can be a sort of replicable model, how you see your work with CARE and these sort of food systems and the sort of interconnected needs that you've identified, how they might be, they're replicable at other places, but also scalable in some way that might, instead of just simply maybe addressing some of these needs, start to really tackle the sort of root causes of the issues at hand. I'm wondering if you might be able to speak a little bit towards that.
Sure. So when we first started our care center, it started in the closet in my office. So you don't have to start big. And where they put us on campus is actually a place that most people didn't want to go. So we just took a space, an old residence hall that no one wanted to be in because, you know, there are all kinds of issues in this building. It's not a great office space, but it was a great food pantry. So start small and think big. Think about how you can grow. When we first started, we were able to support community, but we've grown to the place that we can't just open our doors to the community anymore because we couldn't keep up with the food need on our campus and our community. So we thought about our mission of our office, which is to really think to get students engaged in making an impact in the community and to help improve the quality of life for our community members. So, and I think the fall of 2018, we started Brave Foundations, which is a life skills development program for adults and kids, where we're trying to make a significant impact. And in order to, we never wanted to be in a place where we had to put a caveat on, in order to get food, you had to do something. But we knew that just giving food was putting a Band-Aid on a more significant problem. We weren't addressing the root cause. However, we thought that we could still provide food and provide an education of some sort through our students if we focused on these life skills. So our students go into the community, they go into high schools, and they're teaching things like financial literacy, career readiness, teaching them about resources in the community that they could access in order to, you know, meet other needs that they might have that the care center doesn't provide. And then after they participate in that workshop, they're given vouchers to come to the care center. Now, we would never turn anyone away if someone shows up and says, I'm hungry, but I haven't been to a workshop. We're gonna, you know, still give food, of course. But it was a way for us to help meet the mission of our office, to help get students involved in helping them think about how they can make a difference in the lives of others, and also have more of an impact on the root cause of food insecurity beyond just, you know, giving out food when it's available.
Thank you. And that sort of holistic thinking and the way that all of these issues and networks are connected really is such an interesting theme throughout this entire report, which I really encourage people to read and consider and think about how all of these issues that very often we think of as discrete and unconnected really are quite interweaved. And that actually is a perfect sort of segue to asking you, Noran, to talk a little bit more about Growing Change, which I think is such an amazing example of, you know, at first might be seen as, you know, a social service organization in some way, but, you know, as so much more. And you've tackled so many interesting different threads with your work. And specifically, I'm really interested in how you have brought in sort of education and history and community engagement in particular, really leaning into the fact that you are flipping a prison and its histories of incarceration, and then the labor that you described that built so much of North Carolina's infrastructure. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more about why and the process that brought you to really putting that to be such a central part of your organization's mission, and why you thought that was important to do so.
Well, I think one gift and challenge that we have from our region is that, and if you look at all of the panelists that are speaking today from our region, we stand at the intersection of a lot of different challenges and needs, but also in opportunities. So students who are first gen, who are hungry, who have other challenges going on. That's an excellent example of what Christie was just talking about. Generational farmers who are seeing some incredible impacts on farm families because of the way we're growing food, like Ed was talking about. And so for us, when we are looking at these field camp prisons, basically you're looking at work campsites and forced labor, again, building our road system. So unless you move around our region by helicopter, you touch this history every day. And North Carolina, frankly, got a pass on that. If you confront North Carolina, we try to divert your gaze to Mississippi or Alabama or Louisiana, right? That's the shuffle that we've learned a long time ago. But North Carolina was #1 in the use of forced prison labor. So think about these historic times that we find ourselves in. And what you find is that these work camp prisons that were built in the 1920s, we've been able to do incredible work when we've been able to connect our youth teams with leaders in the field. So Kimber Hines, also a contributor on the historical side of things from UNCG, now has been able to lift up the first ever exhibit on the North Carolina field camp prison era. And what it reveals is these prisons that were built in the 1920s, they are a link from the Jim Crow South that connects chattel slavery to the mass incarceration of today and the disproportionality that we see in that incarceration of today. And so for us to be able to reclaim these work camp prison sites and not whitewash them, not turn them into some spectacle, there had to be respect. And it's a cultural expectation in our area that we are to be respectful of the history. And so it was from that place that we had to really think about thorny issues like the liminal space. And, and again, this is the leadership from your guilds, designers, planners, and architects. It's so crucial to lay folk like ourselves, because this is part of your craft, is helping us understand how people enter space. And then we're able to bring the cultural and historical reference to that. I'll personify it by giving you kind of a place on our farm right now. We have an old hot box. So this old hot box is, because the prison was so old, is beyond solitary confinement. We have plenty of those cells as well. But the hot box was if you were clashing with the leadership, the guards, you would be thrown in the hot box. And so we were told you were given a cup of water and an empty bucket. And they would check on you 12 hours later. So now this small cordoned off cinder block, metal doored building, this torture device, that technology was created during chattel slavery. And now it's still present today on these sites. And our youth team have the plans to reclaim that as a reading room and a recording studio so that positive messaging can be lifted up as youth help reclaim these complicated backgrounds that they're from. So to further illustrate, I'd say, what do you do with prison perimeter? And Ravin Patel we'll talk a little bit about why we use multi-species grazing to lift up a demonstration for other farmers in our area, kind of riffing off what Ed was talking about in a slightly different format. So we're showing how you use a diversity of small flock or herd livestock that can add value to your farm, but also improve our sandhill soil over time. So Ravin, talk about the grazing approach that we have on the perimeter.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name's Ravin, and I'm one of the youth leaders at Growing Change. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to take these animals out onto the pasture, the perimeter around our site. And we have a donkey, her name is Miss Easter. And so we're going to be taking her around the perimeter, and we're going to have chickens and those smaller animals that can, get the feces and other things that the donkey can't get behind Miss Easter. And it's really an efficient plan, Noran. I don't know how you came up with it, but when I learned about it, I knew that I wanted to like take on that field or that part of our work. And something I think is funny is that we've created this shade structure for Miss Easter, and it's basically like this. How would I describe it? It's like this right triangle with a wheel lever system, and we'll basically, as Miss Easter moves, we'll also take it wherever Miss Easter goes, so that when she's staying out there overnight or throughout the day, she can have shade, and it's really efficient. And I just love the idea, Norm.
When you bring up a good point that this is actually a very old idea that's been retooled to be able to make it more accessible in the modern market, right? And so like Ravin was saying, we have cattle that ranchers donate to our farm. When cattle have twins, it creates a real problem, as one animal is often kicked off. So they're able to bring it to our farm, and we're able to have the large ruminants. We have an heirloom flock of sheep, and these heirlooms are not fancy showing sheep. They're heirloomed because they still have resistant genetics, one of the only 2 breeds left in the world in sheep that are able to naturally resist the parasites, as parasites are overrunning our animal medical controls. So the large ruminants, the small ruminants, Miss Easter, our guardian animal, and then chicken tractors getting pulled behind. So our question to y'all would be, what's the difference between a prison perimeter and a pasture? I mean, it's about renovation of the soil, right? Like what Ed was talking about. Mm-hmm. This isn't unique to a prison. This is unique to a lot of hard-worn space in our area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's so amazingly powerful about your work is the way you have taken these various spatial conditions and have worked to understand the social overlays or foundations that have embedded through them, and how in both now mediating those and transforming those, but also in understanding and reckoning with them, we're able to both learn about our past, but also move forward in really productive ways. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more, and maybe Joey and Morgan can share their thoughts as well in terms of the collaboration that you've had working together, in terms of how working with designers and not coming from any sort of design background yourself, what you've learned about how either spatial thinking or the ways in which designers approach work has both sort of enriched your own activities with Growing Change, but also changed the way you've thought about how you might approach this work.
Well, and let me start out by, claiming my ignorance. When we first began this, and there was discussion of a community charrette, I will fake it during that initial meeting, but then I'll Google whatever terms I don't know, and so now I'm left with a French cart. I'm not really sure how to kind of work that out. And it was through our experience with designers, planners, and architects that we learned how to engage community, how to engage our own team in thinking about how form influences function as we have these buildings that are quite complicated, as I said, from the 20s. And then we have to rethink, all right, well, what can they be used for right now in the interim? And then what's the long-term vision? And again, it's that lever bar of long-term vision that you're able to expand. You're able to move policymakers, as again, at the core of what we're trying to create is this open source kind of public practice tool in this idea of how reclamation is made. And so I'll give you a bad example, then I'll turn it over to Morgan and Joey for the good example. The bad example, we've got a lot of support from EPA. I was a layperson to this. I learned that I needed to write a very particular set of grants to get an assessment for the property. In our area, we call that a brownfield 1 and 2. And so did that, got a lot of support. And then when they're assessing the site, making the tests of materials and soil, et cetera, there's a particular part of the site that the guys know well called the horseshoe that was, for whatever reason, set aside, and it looked like it could conceivably even be graves that were no longer marked. So when we lifted that up to the EPA, the word that we got back was, don't worry about unmarked graves because they're 6 feet below the ground. As long as you don't have a deep building structure there, they won't be a problem. And then we had to gently explain to the EPA, no, that is a problem for us. See, in our culture, we can't do that. That's not what we do. So we need your help to bring down one of your Dr. Seuss machines to figure out what we have under this ground so that we can move on respectfully. But in our work with your guild, facilitated, and I think this is a powerful point, facilitated by students initially, now professionals, of course, but students who, of course, already were becoming professionals, we were able to kind of connect to that radical revisioning, that optimism, and that opportunity. So I'll turn it over to Joey and Morgan as far as what that was like to roll down to North Carolina on a field camp prison.
I mean, I'll just say quickly for us, I mean, I think part of the whole kind of purpose around group project was trying to find a way to break out of what is considered like kind of traditional architecture practice and design practice, and out of design, what you're kind of taught in design school. And specifically, I think we were all, as students, looking for an opportunity to connect more directly with a community-based project that had this building component to it, or site component, physical component to it. And then that led to so many other possibilities of design that I think, had we first approached it as just we're only looking for projects where we are building a house, building a structure, I think we would have missed out on some of the more powerful opportunities to think through revisioning of parts of the site in ways that I don't think we would have come to on our own without the context of North Carolina, without the context that Noran and Kimber and some of the other people that we've been able to work with brought to the project, and the youth leaders of their visions of not only what they wanted to see, but why and where it was coming from, and what it was based in. And so that was like the most exciting part for us, right? A new way to approach, or a different way than we're taught to approach design thinking. And then I think the last thing I'd say is, I mean, we as students have also just thought about this a lot, of how you move forward in a design practice that is community-based or nonprofit-based, or kind of starts from the client rather than the object. And so we actually took time, a few of us, to just talk to one another and think through some of the questions that we have, especially as people in school. And a lot of us, when the report was starting and coming together, were just leaving school. So we were having a lot of the questions of how do you actually kind of establish your North Star of design, and what brings you to the work, and what centers you in the work that you do as a designer. And so we decided to actually include that in the report as kind of a few of us just talking and almost having a reflection and confessional about both of our, I think, our excitements about design and what we're hoping for in the future, but as well as some of our current challenges and trying to figure out how we work through those in the future.
Nick, could I jump in for just 1 second? It's a question for Noran and Ed and Christie and Deb and Tanner, who hasn't talked yet, but can you imagine that there is a role, an ongoing role in the community as a continuous embedded member of the community for designers in the way that a family doctor, for example, might have a place in it, or does have a place in in small towns and small communities? Because this is it's architecture as architecture is, as you've all been talking about, is not often connected with places like you're talking about here, but can you all imagine an ongoing role for architects in the communities that you're working in? And what kind of projects might that involve? Kind of building off of the idea of reimagining the prisons.
I would say for us that in Pembroke, there are so many spaces that are not being utilized or that could be re-envisioned to be something really wonderful for our community, resources that we need. And sometimes I think, even myself, I think, I really want to create this Center for Engaged Learning. I need a new building, which is not the case. I just need someone to help me think about a space differently or to reimagine what I could do with the resources that I have. So in small rural communities, our downtown has so much potential. And we need people to come in and help us think about how we can turn that into something that's useful for our students, to attract more businesses to our community. So absolutely, that's what I'll do.
So I want to kind of capitalize on what Chris just talked about. We also live in rural North Carolina, and there's a lot of issues here, and it's a lot around what poverty looks like. So our region is right now is classified as a Tier 1 county. We're having some issues with, jobs and keeping jobs here. And we talked a little bit about tobacco, how tobacco formed the whole region. It's not just this particular region, a lot of regions throughout the state of North Carolina and South Carolina. And if you look back on these facilities that Christie was talking about, these buildings that are existing, they were built by tobacco money. And so as tobacco money went away, we faced manufacturing issues. They went away. And just recently, we've had some issues with floodwaters and so forth. From a standpoint of, what health looks like, we talked a little bit about this facility, bringing this facility at UNC Pembroke to life around ag and health. We are what we eat, no matter what. If we eat burgers every day, we're part of that burger industry. We got to figure out ways how to lighten the load on inorganic everything, not just fertilizer, but pesticides has got to come to the table. But from another standpoint looking, I've just learned this from moving home. I moved home back in 2004 to have a family, take care of my family. But as we look at the minority sector, the disadvantaged sector, these folks, their chemistry in their bodies is different. We're more prone to addiction than any other group. Alcohol it's a problem. Medication from the health industry is another problem that we don't know how to handle. So somehow or another, some input in the younger generation has got to come to the table around what addiction looks like. And addiction is many forms. I don't know all those forms, but I can see a lot of problems with what anxiety looks like. There's a lot of anxiety in minority groups that's got to be dealt with. And I see it in the convenience stores here. I see it on the road. I see it with, abuse of tobacco, and us as Native people have never known what abuse of tobacco is, but we know today we're addicted to whatever's in tobacco and whatever's been put in that. So I would say from the ag health side is to educate people more along the lines of, your body is a pristine chapel, and you need to put in your body the things that will make you stronger and live longer. Those are some issues I think we have from a long time. Most people don't know this, but from the Native standpoint, we're more prone to addiction than any other group, I think. And I've dealt with it myself. At one time, I did, have some issues with alcohol. I really liked it, but it dawned on me one day, alcohol was setting me back. And I didn't know what it was. I added it together and like, okay, it's no longer for me. And I talked to folks more and more about how alcohol is not a part of our daily lives. So I just wanted to bring that to the table because there is a different culture here. This culture is still managing through poverty, through mistrust, through a lot of disadvantaged systems that's been in place here. A lot of mistrust from a lot of different agencies is still here. And I deal with this. I deal with it today in my job with what mistrust looks like. So a lot of times if a form is filled out, these farmers, they bring it directly to me. I go over it and I submit it from my desk. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that, from the Vilsack standpoint, Vilsack is back at the table again, and there's a lot of mistrust with Vilsack. I don't have any mistrust with him. I'm sure that we all do our jobs based on what we need to do. But looking at it from a standpoint, lots of money is getting ready to come down the pipeline, over $1 billion in, socially disadvantaged farmers. And right now we can capitalize on this, and we can bring people to the table. We can develop, new buildings. We can develop, new farmers that have a lifelong connection to agriculture.
Yeah, I think I would just jump in and say, I think that's, Rosalie, your question is exactly something that we hope that that's part of our whole purpose and collaboration in doing this report as well, because I think a lot of the topics when we first started speaking with folks, they weren't obviously connected to architecture. And so I think like there had to be a moment where we were starting to say everything that you're talking about does have a connection to the built environment. And that as it's also kind of our job as built environment professionals to connect those dots in some way, as well, to say that like all of these issues have a built environment impact. And I think like the idea of having, architects live kind of in the same space that we see doctors as some theoretically accessible to everyone, in a way that people, I think, right now would not say that they have a need or accessibility to architecture, even though everyone is occupying a building that in some way, or using a building, or even just in an environmental space that has been designed or thought through by an architect or planner, whether they're, a capital A architecture with a fancy name that we all know, or just your kind of regional standard architect who's, maybe even doing arguably more work than the architects that we really like kind of canonize, because they're doing like the daily on the ground planning that actually ends up constructing your everyday structure, along with some of the things you might consider your like kind of star structures in an environment. So I mean, I think that's a question that we were, especially as students, trying to say, are we interested in continuing to further the legacy of architecture as this thing that is completely separate and inaccessible to the everyday person? Or are we trying to find a way to bring architecture not just to the table, but to like kitchen and living room tables in the way that, to just empower people to know that everyone has the right to speak about architecture and that it's not just a kind of coveted field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that notion kind of came to the forefront a couple times in some of our initial conversations with some of the contributors, as well as like a question of like, you guys are architects, right? What are you interested in talking to me about about the care center or about this church organization in North Carolina? And I think just having those conversations and for all of us learning together how the built environment does impact these things, or how we're impacted by the built environment, and to start to think in that way is just something that was really enriching about all of this. And absolutely to kind of emphasize Morgan's point, that was absolutely the goal that we were trying to establish, is that architecture should be a right. It shouldn't be something that is only accessible by privileged, wealthy, white clients and patrons of the field, that it needs to be something that everyone is thinking about.
And on our side, you know, I think it's I'm really captured by that question, because I can't emphasize it enough how your guild helped advance our work in a way that we kind of knew we needed to connect to you, but we didn't know the full breadth and scope of what that connection could look like. And Group Project was brilliant in the way that they came in and worked shoulder to shoulder. I remember there was a moment that I was talking to two of the MIT students, and they were kind of matriculating through the program, and I said, you know, you guys I really appreciate your work as professionals. You know, you really helped me advance work. And they both kind of paused and said, wow, you're the first person to call us professionals. And I, you know, my comment was, well, you're a whole lot more effective as professionals than a small Rolodex of folk that I deal with on a regular basis for this project. I think it was a revisioning of kind of the role and how the work was approached, like Morgan was talking about, and our youth team as well, that became synergistic in a way that we didn't even know we needed. And so Ryan is another one of our youth leaders, and our internet in this area is not very stable, and especially where Ryan is. So we'll see if he is here. But Ryan, could you talk about like what the next projects for us are in the spring, just to give an example? And maybe not. Okay, so like, oh, you there, man? We can barely hear you. Tell you what, I'm assuming other folks cannot hear Ryan?
No,
okay.
Unfortunately, it's very light.
Yeah, Ryan, I will send your respect from Laurel Hill, but I don't think they can hear you from there. But so Ryan's kind of helping to. In fact, we're working again on this tomorrow. We're reclaiming one of these old wooden structures on the farm that was just basically a kind of a complicated storage building, and we're taking that storage building and applying it to our poultry production, adding some free-ranging duck population as well. So how do small farmers, how are they able to reclaim wooded sections of their property, wetland sections of our properties? So these kind of value-added demonstration units are designed kind of like what Ed was talking about, to encourage value-added practices that can be good for the family and the environment at the same time. And so as the youth are kind of focused on this, that whole tradition, there was a direct impact from the work of the, you know, our partnership with the designers, planners, you know, and architects. So I don't know how we would get this funded as far as architects, planners, and designers as family doctors. I can imagine a traveling system that would move around our area, and every community you would find would have these large unused spaces, some of them derelict. And every one of the communities, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you would have individuals asking, what should we do with that? Why is that here? What could be done differently with that, and how impactful that would be for the community? So it's a brilliant idea. The last thing we would say is that that's the reason that design is a particular module in the Prison Flip toolkit that we're creating. So that this is a curriculum based, that as you unpack it, you agree to the open source format that we're engaging in. And one of the lead modules will be on, you know, design and planning for that purpose. And that will go out to 300 communities around the US. So hopefully we'll bring it back to Main Street.
Tanner Tanner, are you there someplace? I don't see you, but I assume you were there someplace, right? Because I have a question for you.
Yeah, I'm here.
You're there. Okay. So you wrote this beautiful, moving piece, such an empathetic piece about the tensions and over the control of space and access to space, focusing on a specific church and the restrictions and demands on it during the pandemic, and with a Black Lives Matter request to use the space. I wonder if you could kind of project that out a little bit and talk a little bit about how differences get over space and control of space get negotiated and worked out in the community more broadly. It's still an intimate environment of a small town, but not a specific congregation or institution.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, in a lot of ways, it depends on, what it is you're talking about, right? I mean, and so faith spaces, congregations, as I write about, they're still very influential in how decisions are made. And a lot of times, I come from a rural place as well, and grew up in a church. And a lot of times the people who were making the decisions in the church are the same people who are making the decisions in town, So there's a lot of overlay there in rural America, maybe more broadly, maybe not just in the rural South. But I think probably the most helpful way for me to talk about it would be workshopping some of the earlier drafts with Joey and Morgan. So my contribution to this project was really different, I think, than what everybody else was doing, because my background's actually in 16th century religion, art, and culture. And so I was coming at this as more a local person involved in a congregation who was dealing with the pandemic on the one hand, and then the social unrest in our country on the other. And so in an earlier draft of the essay, I was really trying to contextualize it by kind of working through the history of American liberalism. And so what liberalism has always argued, we're talking about John Locke and Immanuel Kant, maybe some Jean-Jacques Rousseau as well. It's just a basic distinction that religious life and public life are two separate spheres, right? And what they're trying to protect, and I want to be charitable here, right, is they're reacting to the religious violence of the 16th and 17th centuries. And it was just interesting to me that we were sort of going through this, as we do, often because these things are so hidden in plain sight, with this contest all of a sudden, again, about the role of people who practice faith, what their role in the social conversation should be, especially when there's violent outbursts on the table. And so I worked through the sort of history of that. It didn't quite make it into the essay wisely. Joey and Morgan helped me edit it out, but it ultimately, I looked at an 1878 Supreme Court case, Reynolds versus United States. And in that decision, they make a really clear statement that I think is so interesting, and actually went back and pulled it from the original essay. The decision said the right to hold you can hold any religious belief, but you don't have the right to engage in any religious activity, full stop. So, I was trying to think through what does this mean for the use of a Presbyterian congregation in this region for their space, and there was all this conversation going on. What does it mean to hold a belief, right, but you can't practice any activity, and so I thought the negotiation that was going on within the congregation itself was sort of microcosm of the larger political conversation we were having. So to answer your question, I would say that the two are not separate, and I think that's really what I'm driving at. They're, in the American mind, religious life and social life, or political life, let me say, are two separate spheres, as I said, and they're really not, right? Like what we do when we are participating in a faith organization or whatever is a direct reflection of our politics, which is a hard thing for many people to, to deal with. But I think it's true. And I think the negotiation, this was the productive conversations I had with Joey and Morgan over the summer. Sorry, my daughter was knocking on the window. Yeah, the productive conversation that we had was, well, what does it mean then for there to be space in this question of who controls it, right? And what we learned, I think, and I'm really opening up more questions than anything, what we learned is we don't know, right? They're highly contested, and built environment is a political expression. It's the political expression of a group of people. And so, yeah, that's I don't know if that's a sufficient answer to your question, but that's where I was headed with the piece.
Thank you. Yeah, it's to everybody who's here. I hope you read the whole report, and including Tanner's piece, which is just very so stimulating to thinking about what, how we deal with each other in space, and all of the kinds of questions about controls and what we owe each other that have risen to the surface during the pandemic. And what about what I need, and what about what we all need together, and how do those relate to each other?
Yeah, and I would just say real quick that one of the things I was also trying to highlight, and this was some of the historical background that didn't quite make it in, is that the Protestant congregations in this region, and this is this is the sad connection to the Civil War and the debate that was taking place in Protestant congregations, is the doctrine of the spirituality of the church argued that Christians should have no role whatsoever in commenting on the political affairs of the day. All right, and the idea was that, and this is sort of liberalism, right? The Lockean liberalism is that the material affairs are your public life, right? And your private life is your religious life. And those two things should never meet. But what this congregation was going through in Laurinburg was just how that's not really how it works, right? And so there was a lot of conflict and contest and argument, but it was directly connected to that history of Southern chattel slaveholders who were making this argument that don't touch our material circumstances, but we can still be good Christians and not have to face the moral horror of the thing that we're involved in. And so that's beneath the surface, but that's also what I was, when we reference the doctrine of the spirituality of the church. So it's a really complicated and horrible history, but a lot more has been written and could be written.
Thank you. So just maybe one last question before we all sign off here, that actually kind of grows out of that, and what a lot of other people have said, sort of maybe implicitly in some of their remarks, but something that's really interesting, I think, about this region as a whole is its sort of mix of communities and cultures and status for decades, maybe centuries even, as a sort of both majority minority rural region, but where no single community is statistically at least dominant. So I'm curious, actually, if you might all talk about, as the country as a whole and as rural places in particular become increasingly diverse, and we have to all sort of learn to live together and what that might mean, but what this region along the Lumbee River might be able to teach other communities, both either in terms of negative experiences, but also positive ones. Might you all be able to share some thoughts on that?
I'll speak to my role showing up in a small liberal arts college here real quick. I'm not from here. I'm from South Appalachia, upstate South Carolina, of mixed race background, Asian and white. And so And I came to a very white dominant institution that was founded by Presbyterians in this region, with all of the money and sort of family names that go along with it. And one of the things that the college has struggled with now is the sudden diversification, not only of the faculty and staff, but also of the student body. Mainline Protestantism, as everyone knows, is collapsing. And so the college now can't rely on a steady stream of upper middle class white Presbyterians, I'll just call it what they've relied on historically, to fill the seats. And so that has been really interesting to see. And Noran, having grown up here, I think he could also speak to the transformation of St. Andrews and the educational moral crisis in many ways that we're living through right now. But as a young faculty member, it's been really interesting to engage with the older generation of faculty who've spent, in some cases, like 40 or 45 years of their career at the institution. So I think St. Andrews is symbolic, Nicholas, to your point of larger trends of diversification, and even in a region like this where one would not expect as much influx of people from the outside. So I don't know if Noran he has a much better perspective. That's just my St. Andrews University perspective.
I would like to share a perspective as a youth leader from Growing Change. So I obviously live in Scotland County, in Laurinburg, which is in neighbors Wagram. It's Wagram and Laurinburg are in the same county, Scotland County. So Scotland County, a third of the population is white, a third of the population is African American, and a third of the population is brown. And most of that brown population is Native American. And so I obviously fall in that brown population. But what is interesting is that I am not Native American. I am Indian. My parents are from India, and my mom is from India. My dad is from Kenya. And what's interesting is that Growing Change, we have members that come from all walks of life. Me being Indian and Kenyan, another member being Latinx. We have Black members, we have white members, we have Native American members, and we're all able to come together in the small town in rural North Carolina and give back to the community. And it's crazy because I never imagined 2 years ago when I joined the group that I'd see like such a diverse group doing, what we were doing on a decommissioned prison, not knowing the previous history.
And I would say generally in our region, and I am certainly not painting us as Camelot, because we're not. And though I am saying that this is part of our strength, this is part of the richness of this area. I'm thankful that myself, that I was a white guy born in an area that we weren't a majority. And I got to learn the things that one can learn if you lean in an area so rich in diversity, and purposely moved back so that my children, who happen to be white, can have that same experience. So I can't underscore, and it's what's powerful is that there's almost this kind of strange parallel process, not to lean into like a bad Southern short story, but in all this ruin that is around us, kind of attracts attention. And so people are constantly showing up to photograph the old prison without an understanding that, it's now transitioning to a farm, to kind of engage in that ruin porn kind of, portrayal, which can be beautiful, but it's curious how dead-ended it is in any kind of visioning process whatsoever. They're only interested in seeing the decay. And so as our region is presented nationally, it's often presented with that decay forward. And we don't talk about the richness of our diversity. We don't talk about the richness, the ingenuity that Ed talked about, the innovation that Christie and Deb are talking about, Davon's work up in Ellerby. So we have to educate. And it's been a real pleasure to be able to participate today and not have to put on that voice for anybody, because I knew this is kind of a safe space to be able to just talk about, you know, what's working, what's not working, you know, in our region. And it also, that itself reflects back our experience with the designers, planners, and architects that had to educate us to your guild. I'm not sure if your guild is nationally known for that welcoming tactic, but that's a huge potential in and of itself then, that could put architects, planners, and designers on main streets, that nonprofits like us, that interested groups like us, that folks interested in revisioning and reclamation, you know, would turn to.
Can I jump in and speak to that just very quickly? I know we're trying to wrap things up, and I don't want to take the last word from Noran, because he will say it much more eloquently than I can. But just I had the opportunity of photographing this project, and as he shared, I think that the South a lot of times, unfortunately, is presented for its deficits. And it's just not true. There is so much resourcefulness here. There is so much innovation here. There is so much hospitality. And I appreciate the way that this, you know, report, I think, showcases that, and the way that I think that those are skills that architects have as well. I don't think you can be successful as an architect if you are not innovative and resourceful and hospitable. And so I think that to me, as I look at the way this all came together, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have gotten to participate in it, because I think that it did a really good job of that.
That is a great way to end. I just, on behalf of the League, I cannot thank you enough. This report, I mean, all of the reports, but maybe in some way, this report in particular has fulfilled so magnificently what we had hoped for from this project, which is to be able to truly hear from people working in other places. And you all, what we are able to learn from the report in this conversation today about the particularities of stewardship and care and how those are manifested in the work that you're all doing is just inspiring, and really what we had hoped to be able to accomplish with these reports from across the country. So thank you all very, very much. The next session and the next report to be published is going to be, the full title is The Lakota Reservation and the Legacy of American Colonization, with the editors Annie Combs and Zoe Maliaros. And Zoe, I think, I don't know if she's still here, but she was here. She is still here. Anyway, that report is going to be published next Tuesday on the Architectural League's website. And then the conversation, like this conversation, will happen. It's the only one, I believe, that's not going to be on a Friday. It's on Wednesday, March 24th. So I hope as many of you as can will join us for that. One just housekeeping thing, anybody who would like CEUs for being here today, they're in the chat. There's some information about that. And thank you all. I am very, very moved by this conversation and by the report and by the chance to connect with all of you. I mean, you know, as we've said now to the said over and over, that one good thing, I guess, of the way that we've needed to adjust this year is to be able to talk face to face, albeit digitally, but to talk face to face with more people. And I know if we had, it would have been difficult to have this conversation without Zoom. So I'm grateful for that. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you all so much. And thank you for such an inspiring conversation, not only applicable to the Lumbee River region, but I think throughout the US as well. So thank you. With that, I think we are all set. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for joining all the contributors. Appreciate it.